Our mulch, which is got to be one of the favorite words and favorite strategies that I have in ecosystems because it is so simple yet so paramount in the way that it shapes our world, our ecosystems, and our carbon balance globally. So this is a temperature buffer. It's going to keep the soil cool when the hot sun is beating down on your soil. This is going to reduce the stress on soil organisms. It's going to reduce the problems that we have with soil that overheats where it causes your plants to go to seed. And it's just a really great temperature buffer. The other thing is that in the fall, the organic matter layer, the mulch layer, is actually going to insulate the roots against some of the first frosts. So some of your plants are going to have a little bit more frost tolerance because of the actual mulch layer at their feet. Mulch is one of my favorites. It's absolutely key in transforming the soil ecosystem. And first and foremost, it is a great temperature buffer. So it's going to protect your soils from being exposed to the full hard sun of the midday and afternoon. And it's going to prevent that soil from overheating, which could cause stress on your plants. The first strategy that we're going to use to create living soil is with mulch. We've mentioned this quite a few times already, and it is one of my favorite solutions because it is so vast in its implications in soil health and disease and pest control, but it is also incredibly simple. It is carbon-based material that grows on trees or on plants. So it's got many different ways that it's going to affect the living soil ecosystem and our soils for cultivation, and the first of these is temperature buffering. As a temperature buffer, it's going to protect the soil from the harsh heat of the sun, which is going to keep those roots nice and cool. This is going to stop your plants from going to seed too early. It's going to stop your soil from drying out and killing the bacteria or the fungi that are present. And it's going to just generally keep the plant's roots cool, which is going to be much better for their overall growth and abundance. The next way that they interfere with the actual temperature of our ecosystem is because that thick layer of mulch creates an insulation. It means that on the coldest nights, it actually keeps the soil warmer. So at some periods of the year, like at the end of the year when the frost is starting to set in, a thick layer of mulch can actually insulate the soil roots and protect certain plants. Like I said, I use mulch and a big pile of straw or shredded leaves around all my kale plants that are still there in the fall in order to insulate them from the winter cold and keep a microclimate zone inside that pile of anywhere above -19 to keep the kale fresh, which means I can eat kale all year round. By doing so, you also now have turned an annual plant, which was kale that would normally die back, into a perennial plant, and it will come back year after year and produce good quality seed for you, as well as some really young and tender tissue shoots in the early spring. Another way that mulch is important for our soil is to maintain the soil humidity. So if we look at the actual interaction that's going on, the mulch is going to be not only absorbing the rain that would normally cause compaction of the soil and then run off to the river, it's going to be catching and absorbing that water, so catching and storing that water like the second principle of permaculture, but then it's also going to be feeding the mycelium, which are going to be producing water, right? So the fungi are actually going to be creating new water molecules, which is going to dramatically change the water balance in the soil. The other way that our mulch is actually going to be interfering with the humidity is through an interesting phenomenon where we have anytime you have a surface that has a cold side to it and there's a humid air mass moving through it, you have condensation of moisture from the air onto that cold surface. So if you have never done this before as a kid, looked underneath a rock and found that it's always moist, or dug under a pile of leaves, then this is part of your homework. Get outside, start digging in somebody's mulch and picking up rocks and looking underneath. There will always be moisture available down there, and not because it's rained, not because the soil is moist, but some of this is actually directly related to the fact that we have humidity in the air that is condensing beneath the mulch as the air passes through it, and therefore our mulch and our rock piles and our rock mulches are acting as a drip irrigation, pulling condensation and moisture from the atmosphere to then provide a steady supply of moisture to our garden. The final way that the mulch is actually going to interfere with our soil humidity is by feeding the organisms and specifically the worms. By feeding the earthworms in the soil, we're actually increasing the permeability of the soil and therefore the absorption of the rainfall. So we get more water storage in the soil because we had mulch in the first place. The second thing is by feeding these organisms and these fungi, there are particles of the organic matter from the mulch that are going to be added to the soil bulk. This is literally a sponge that is going to be able to absorb the rain when it comes and hold that moisture for a long period of time. So there's many different ways that the mulch is actually playing with the humidity of our soil. The next that's really important is weed prevention, and this only happens if you have a good substantial amount of seed-free mulch, which means wood chips that don't have a lot of leaves from like the Manitoba maple, which is why we have so many seedlings in our garden, is because we use leaf mulch from the Manitoba maple. Using straw rather than hay, or rotten hay that has had at least a year or two to rot and decompose, which will allow those weed seeds to grow and die, or to actually die through the decomposition process. So weed prevention is going to happen when you have that mulch that is seed free be laid down on your garden that is at least 10 to 15 centimeters thick. If you have 1 inch, 2 or 3 centimeters of mulch, many weeds are just going to push through that, no problem at all. So what we want to do is create that thick layer so that there's a resistance, but there's also a huge amount of distance that that plant has to get up and through before it's able to actually grow. So a lot of the weeds that will show up in this situation are going to be seeds that have blown in, like dandelion seeds or grass that have blown in and land on the mulch and grow, which means to remove them, they have not gotten a thick root mass in the soil. They're just in the top loose layer of the mulch, and therefore they're really easy to remove. The other way that mulch is interacting with our weed prevention is simply by providing soil ecosystem whereby we have an abundance of different nutrients. Means that you won't have thistle tending to grow because you have alkaline soils, because with the organic matter we've balanced the pH. We won't have dandelions which are taking over everywhere because you've got compact deficient soil, because we're actually going to have decompacted soil that isn't deficient anymore. Many of the weeds that grow in our ecosystems and our garden systems are indicator species that are telling you about a specific problem or condition that allows them to grow so well. And so by putting mulch on the soil, we are balancing those soil conditions and creating a favorable condition for the plants that you grow.